Welcome to another episode of the Edufuturists podcast. It is absolutely wonderful to be back in the studio recording with a very, very, very good friend of the Edufuturists podcast. I think this is number 4. That's the 4th time been on the podcast, Al. And he's going to be, we're very, very pleased to be talking about what has already become a number 1 bestseller on Amazon, and excited to hear about all the things that Al has been doing and traveling the world and doing what Al does, being the kindest man in EdTech, as we've said multiple times. But we're super, super excited to have Al Kingsley on the podcast. Steve, it's also really lovely to see you, my friend.
No, you've been on an holiday. We've done loads of different stuff, Ben.
We've done loads of cool stuff, haven't we?
Absolutely. But yeah, no, I'm looking forward to it as always. I think we're going to delve into the book, but also just, the book will be a focal point, for anybody that's listening and everything else, which is great. But also your exploration, and you do so many, many different hats. You mentor, you guide people in EdTech. You also work in education in different roles. You are just an all-round good guy, Al. If we do say so.
Bless you.
Smoke up. But I think that all-rounded nature actually really benefits. And I think unpicking some of those bits, we'll go back to maybe the first time we had you on, the second time and the third, and also then extend some of those bits. So it'd be really, really good to kind of to learn about in terms of your side, Al. What's kind of going on? What's floating your boat? What's really been featured beyond before we dive into the book? What are you finding in terms of EdTech and in the education space?
Well, I guess there's quite a lot happening. I mean, the first thing is I do wear a lot of hats. I'm going to take the argument that I'm still trying to figure out what I'm good at. So I keep trying to do new roles. I'm increasingly, I think we all see it from our different perspectives. Everything in education, skills, the economy, what happens on impacts on people's lives is more and more interconnected than people ever really stop and think. And so in my efforts to kind of follow the circle through, I kind of have my roles in education and with my mat, and I'm very excited. We've just been awarded another new build school to add to our cluster of schools in the south side of Peterborough, something I'm really passionate about. But then, I'm an apprenticeship ambassador. I'm joined and worked with the combined authority for our region. Mayoral authorities are obviously the government strategy for growth. So I chair both the business board and sit on the combined authority board, supporting particularly digital education and skills within our region. And within the Cambridge and Peterborough region, there's a whole heap of innovation and expertise that's often recognised as world leading, including in the space of AI. But I also see a constant narrative around we need to grow UK PLC economic growth, but we don't connect the dots often with we need to create and prime the pump with actually the right skills for our learners, so that the jobs we create are actually for people living here in the UK and not for people around the world, because we're a much more competitive space. So there's all sorts of challenges, but I do think connecting the dots, bringing stuff together is something that we often hear, even at political levels. Narratives and conversations are quite siloed and quite separate. So I've been trying to do that. And it's something that I haven't shared with most people. I know you good folks are aware, but it is something I'm more relaxed talking about. I've also had my own health issues the last recent bits with a cancer diagnosis, which early stages, all good. I've got another operation coming up. But actually, it's been a really good focal point for just reminding yourself about what's important in life, and also focusing on the fact of recognizing no matter where your challenges are, there are always people dealing with more challenges. So it's, in a way, it's kind of given me a bit more of a kick up the backside to, Al, you need to crack on and get some of these things out there and sorted, because none of us can rest on our laurels with indefinite time to do the things we want to do.
Yeah, well, I know, Ben, sorry, I've got to sit. Look, everybody thinks I'm sitting too close. It's because Ben just says he likes my face so much. It's not anything else. He loves my beautiful face. Al, I don't know what that says about you, because you're sitting really far back. But that is the story. But a couple of bits. We've known and we've had those conversations. We all wish you well in terms of that cancer diagnosis, Al. And everything else. But the bit that you kind of touched on, I have seen it. I've been in some high-level conversations. I think it's the first high-level conversation I've ever been involved in, Al. And I know it was high-level because you were invited. And I was like, oh, Al's here. This must be important. And Paddy as well in Text Up. And I was like, oh. And I think I shared this with Ben, actually, a statement of speaking other people's names in the room when they're not there is so important. And I think you do this really, really well. You can when they're not there. That's what you push. But also that kind of stimulates and extends to UK PLC and tech companies and education of the brand of the UK and here. And I know that that's one thing. I've worked in the Google space. I got friends in Google that are great. The Microsoft world, we know those individuals great. But if we focus on all those great products and they invest billions in making great products and everything else, what does that do for the space of the little startups that have a wonderful idea? Have we forgot how to champion those individuals because we just think it's just those big boys and go, well, look, I don't need that because look at that amazing tool. Great, but they can put their prices up at any time. And I was speaking to somebody as well. Like, if you think about AI, I think I saw an article and I can't remember who wrote it and who shared it. It might have even been Ben. Ben shares more on social media than I've ever seen. But it's all that thing of, do we understand that we are actually moving as far away from decentralized as we possibly can by actually going to the big tech companies? That actually we're just moving the power to tech and those big companies rather than politics and governments.
You're absolutely right.
And again, I'm trying to say that in a way that we love those individuals and some great people working in it. But if we don't focus on the upstarts and the startups and the things coming in, we're forgetting. And
I think we forget the power of the ecosystem, and you're absolutely right. And I really appreciate you kind of raising that. You know, we all appreciate there are some really big key players internationally, globally, that influence and provide a platform for many of the technologies that we adopt. But I've said it before, and I'll continue to say it. Too often I get invited or I see we have national level discussions around digital infrastructure skills within the country. And I see the same few major providers of technology sitting around the table. And I continue to argue that we cannot have the foxes guarding the chickens. You know, there is something not quite right in that broader aspiration that what makes our sector, if I take the sector of educational technology in the UK strong, is that it's about innovations. It's about an ecosystem that allows startups to become scale-ups, that allows a natural progression for educators to create innovation and turn it into products, that allows small companies to share insights and grow. You guys will know I chair the BESA EdTech group. And one of my other hats, and I know I just sound like I have too many hats, is I'm a Department for Business and Trade export champion, which is basically I go to trade shows, I go to conferences around the world, and while I'm there, I talk about all the other great products and people I know in the space and try and connect them with the right people that helps them move forward. Again, my view is it costs me nothing to try and provide the introduction, the leg up for others. And if we all did it, that old network greater than the nose, just imagine. What I do see shoots of there's a lot more folks of the same mindset. I think we are growing a community where folks recognize, as you say, you can be invited to a conversation, but it doesn't mean you can't signpost others who should have been in the room or could be in the room or could feed guidance. And what I definitely see when it comes to educational technology and the broader, what's the future of our offer in the UK, is there's too much technology and not enough education in the conversation. The balance isn't quite there. And I think that's really important in terms of co-production, lived experience, and the sense of actually you don't get it. I would argue on the bigger picture, and you've set me off on one now, Steve, so it's your fault. We are still at this mindset that we make decisions around changing our educational policy, the bigger picture, around electoral cycles. We have a 5-year window. We have elected ministers. In some cases, the ministers change on a monthly basis, but typically we want to make changes to the education system where there's a start and finish, where we can show results as part of that electoral cycle. And so as a result, and this isn't UK specific, we find in many Western countries, we actually see the evolution and the improvement of education being really quite slow. And in other countries around the world, where perhaps they have ruling families or governance that doesn't change between different persuasions on a regular basis, whilst we might have different perceptions around their equity and voice that's shared, what we do see is an ability to actually make quick, rapid decisions about long-term change. And so as a result, we often see Western education systems, in many cases, are much slower to evolve. And that's really difficult when all of a sudden that ramp of curve of digital evolution has gone at such a lickety-split pace.
I'm absolutely with you, because you see adoption in some of these countries really quick, and you say, I know Steve regularly references how quickly it was Japan, I think, where he said where they just 70,000 Chromebooks or whatever it was, boom, done. They have to be out, and that's what they agreed. That's what they were doing, and it was a decision. Was it 2 million?
2 million.
Oh, I thought you said 7. See, I don't even listen. I just knew you said Japan. I got the country right. 2 million Chromebooks out. When we're saying they're going out, they're going out. And there's that. And then I wonder as well that there are some people at the other end of the spectrum, as we know it is a spectrum, who are too much education, not enough technology. So the conversation is we want to keep technology out of education. And then there's those people who want, and it then becomes like a battle between them, as well as it becoming electoral, political conversation, an economic decision. And,
it's funny,
yeah.
You know, we always talk about everything about decision making and education. We want to do about evidence informed. Well, that's great, but when it comes to innovation and changing things, sometimes you've also got to have the confidence and boldness to take that leap before. So yes, you can have Japan. I was involved in a project in Kenya where they rolled out 1 million devices to students over a very short period of time, and I was sitting thinking, this is amazing, but I wish we could do that back in England. You've got countries like Estonia that get held up as a reference point. I mean, they had a whole different reason with a breakaway from the Soviet Union to have a whole redesign of their educational system. You take the UK, and we often anecdotally talk about it, but we are sat back to 1870 and those original education reforms of what the education system would look like. And even going earlier than that, we talk about this idea that we've got those core expectations, numeracy and literacy, that allows a person to be productive within the Commonwealth, the empire, or the bigger, depending on how far back in history we go. So I think you see that difference. So when there's a need to suddenly react, we find things are much slower. Now, speed doesn't automatically equal success. Pace of change doesn't. But the ability, when there's a consensus, to actually move at pace, when we recognize that every year we don't, impacts a young person's potential for their success in their own learning journey, I think we have to be really mindful of sometimes being proud of the education system we have in England and the respect it is held around the world, but also a recognition that none of us are perfect, and actually our system needs to look outside and identify a need to change the drivers of what's moving it forward. And ultimately, our education system here in the UK and in many countries around the world has been shaped and defined by our higher education system. Our universities are defining the qualifications that they want as measures to allow that threshold and gate of who comes into that next tier. And that's rippled down to the definitions of A-levels and the definitions of GCSEs and the whole how we measure our system and what we define as being valuable versus not so valuable. You know, and that ripples into whole conversations we might carry on in this conversation. But, you know, you have to kind of unpick a little bit to recognize that there isn't one lever you pull, but you can also see there's a finite cycle here, and there's not necessarily, the conversation doesn't always have to be the education secretary is the point where you can break the cycle.
I agree. And I think when you look at it like this, I know that I think you've got credence in this space and kudos in this space, not just because you've been in the space for a new experience in the space, not just because you are you've got skin in the game, in the fact that you're involved in the trusts and in the educational suppliers agents associations and all the things that go with it, but also you run your own business in that space as well, and are trying to do something that has impact and makes a difference. And I think when you mentioned about hats, sometimes you think, I know you said there that it can come across that I just wear all these hats, but actually I think in this sense that general and the fact that you're in multiple places gives that level of, when Al says this, it's worth listening to. Now for us, we know that anyway because we respect your voice, and there's a whole community of people that look at what you do and think he's the kind of person that you want to be like, because there's a lot of people that won't know, and you probably don't appreciate people blowing the trumpet in this way, but there's a lot of people that won't know the messages that you send and the little meetings that you have in backgrounds that nobody ever sees, the quiet little encouragements and the support for lots and lots of people. which then makes that level of kindness that you talked about earlier, and people being kind and talking about your book and giving you opportunity to speak and things, that comes from somebody who's got skin in the game and has got credence. And I think when it then comes into it, then you've got lots of things that float your boat. There's lots of things that are driving you, and we're grateful that for you telling your story of the things that are now driving you as well. When you've written a book, which is book number 5, is it?
Well, I'm going to call it book number 4. I've done 4 and a guide. There you go.
Okay. So book number 4.
Yeah.
This one is I'm very fortunate. I got a chance to have a look at this early, and very excited for my official copy that I've ordered. That's going to come through the door very, very soon, because as it releases, and I presume I was going to pick it up and show it on the screen any minute.
Yeah.
Oh, not that one. Don't talk about that one.
No, look at that. Sorry, I thought we were talking about my favourite book, not my new.
Yeah, but
That's nice.
There it is.
Keep it nice and simple.
Lovely. So it's the awkward questions in education, and I know that you talk about elephants in the room, which is we love it when people go there, because you're willing to address the things that need talking about. So I wonder if you could tell us why you chose that title first, before we dig into what the book's about.
I think because the reason I wanted to do it was because there are some awkward questions. We all know there are awkward questions, but by the nature of the education space, there's a degree of professional courtesy, there's a degree of sensitivity, there's a degree of threat at the moment in terms of unhelpful external judgments, pressures, terminologies around education, starting from political leaders. There's a rocking of confidence from families about education. And so we all try and be nice and sometimes avoid the most challenging conversations. And I kind of felt, you know what, I kind of feel I'm at a point where I'm just going to say it, but I'm not just going to say it because I believe it. I'm going to spend the best part of a year doing a grown-up book where I research it from perspectives around the world. I think I cite about 350 different research papers and resources within my opinions. I also reach out to peers around the world in different roles, so I don't just want to have the same roles in every school in different countries. And I wanted to see, firstly, whether my views stood up to the test of scrutiny and research, and actually some shaped and morphed, which is actually, I think, is even more of a win from my own personal development journey. But I also recognize that actually the one thing I can do is not give people answers, but I can do the legwork to provide them with the questions that are backed up with the research and the support, so that we can actually accelerate the conversation at a local level and work that up the system. Because I'm not arrogant enough to think that somebody at national level is going to pick up the book and say, well, if Al says so, we better change things fast. But there's also a recognition that not everything that we can shift as levers is a national or an international thing. There are always things we can do at a local level, from our own professional practice through to how we work as a team, as a school, as a trust or a district, and thinking step by step. So I just tried to pick the stuff that I know are uncomfortable sometimes to talk about. And I felt, actually, there's also an element, declaration here. I also picked the stuff that I was really keen to understand better, to actually put some headspace into really unpicking what the causes are. Are they as obvious as they seem? We're very quick to say, oh, it's just common sense. Well, no, it's not always. You know, there's a lot more nuance behind it. So that was the driver. And yeah, awkward questions. I still feel they are awkward, but hopefully if people read them, they'll feel perhaps a bit more comfortable with the types of topics they might want to introduce into their SLT or their trust conversations.
Yeah, and as you as you go through some of those things, Joe, maybe share some, without giving too much away, if people to buy it. Why? I suppose is the book being written now. Why should they buy it? I don't know if this is your elevator pitch that might last maybe 5. It's a large elevator. You know, we're going to go through the roof on the Willy Wonka factory, but like, Joe, that whole thing of like, why do they need to know those questions, and why do they need to have explored them?
Well, that's a really good question. And to be honest with you, I haven't really pitched an elevator pitch. I wasn't planning on ever being in a sales position other than
do it,
a link. But so here's my basic summary. I think we all know there are challenges in education. If we want to be part of the conversation, if we want to be part of the discussion about how we change things, we have to first start by understanding the causes and the root position where we sit. We need to understand if it's something unique to our system, our nation, or fundamentally to education. And so in all the conversations, whether it's our perception about what's a good school, what makes education great, to does AI and technology threaten the existence of the human being at the front of the class, the sage on the stage, the guide on the side, whatever the conversation may be? Our perception about will we be able to recruit educators and what will that look like, to isn't the school of the future virtual? Isn't it up there in the ether? And there's arguments there. If we wiped out, I had a conversation earlier with somebody today, and I was probably rather concerningly saying, if I was God for a day, and if you start thinking that way, you probably need to just pause and reflect a little bit on why you came there. But you'd say, well, if I looked at the globe as a whole and I was delivering a brand new education system, I probably wouldn't be thinking, where do I put all the buildings? Because based on the geography of the world, I couldn't put it close enough to everybody. So I would almost certainly start with an idea of how do I provide a connection for everybody to all access equitably the same opportunity for education. And then I'd think, and alongside that, how could I find the places and spaces to bring the human beings together to enrich that learning journey? So there is a common sense bit that says, actually, why is the model of so many years ago still perfectly valid? And are young people, their same expectations the same of where they were? And clearly the answer is no. But understanding what the difference is between what our views are and Australia's views and America's views, and geopolitical challenges mean that in the blink of an eye, the American education system potentially defunding of the federal system, state by state challenges. We're in a really, really turbulent period of time, but there are common strands, and there are some common strands that make sense to me and have always made sense to me, and there were some that I think I understood, but I needed to get a better grounding. And I shared something at a conference. We were talking around a number of AI tools, and Ben will remember it because he was there too, although this is a test because he may well not have been paying attention during my highly engaging presentation. But I talked about this concept of the difference between our mindsets in education, between the West and East in a very generalized sense. And in the West, we've always had a mindset, the most academic, the smartest child will be most successful in school and on into their future lives. Yeah, smart kids get better qualifications, get better jobs. Easy, huh? And in the East, and I generalize for effect, there's a mindset, and I used a Chinese proverb linked to that, which was a stumbling bird will reach the forest first. And the proverb was, in essence, if you work hardest, if you try hardest, you can be a stumbling bird, not the fastest bird, but you can still get there first. In other words, it's about ethic and commitment work. How much work you put into what you're trying to achieve is what shapes your ability to succeed. And so I like this sort of dichotomy that sits there, because I think it challenges us to rethink our education system, particularly, and at any point, just hit the mute button if I go on for too long on the topic. If we take the view of AI, not as the tool it is, but the challenge it creates around education, and if we assume we've now got these tools that can really do the number crunching and the really high-level mathematics better than a human being, and can do lots of these tools, medical diagnoses quicker than the human being, actually, for the first time, the things that we're looking for that are most important in a new digital world are those most human traits. And if we're looking for those most human traits, whether it's our communication skill, our resilience, our innovation, imagination, creativity, those human things, we've just flipped our education system on the head, because we've just said, instead of saying the smartest kids will be most successful, we're saying people with the broadest set of soft skills, power skills, are most in demand for employers and likely to be most successful. So now our universities, right the way up, have got to stop and think, hang on a second, how are we now going to judge what is success in a world that has suddenly shifted? And I love it, because suddenly, for me, education feels more equitable. It doesn't matter if you're not the most academic. There are still pathways that can allow you to be amazing. And hallelujah. And so that weaves in through, there's 4 or 5 different chapters that all weave in around that. But that's what's happening subtly and slowly, where we've been talking about AI and the technology and what tools are available, is actually behind the scenes, it's been changing actually the things that are most important about our human characteristics.
I think really resonates with us. Ben will know that it really resonates with me and has done for a long period of time. The the need and the place for human intelligence in the world of artificial intelligence, but also for such a long period of time, is never more prevalent, but actually has been
Absolutely.
overlooked. I think AI is heightening technology, and AI is in terms of generative AI. Do you know that kind of, rather than the whole. Are you drinking a port or a wine there, Al? By the way,
Well, given it's Ribena, clearly Ribena.
for sure. Is that Vimto? I
It's a,
absolutely love it. If that's a wine that you've just pulled out, this conversation is going to go to a whole nother place. Absolutely love. I'm going to have to start having wine.
I'm probably not going to get done for it because I'm certainly not on commission for it. Jammy Red Roux, one of my favourite wines. Just a light, subtle note for those just listening to the podcast. Lovely.
But lovely.
It's lovely as well.
I saw it and I was like, sorry for everybody that's just listening. I don't know whether I was like, I'm driving Al to drink through my conversation, or he just loves a wine, or he's just that chilled out and he's just a international man of mystery.
Well,
Al,
I felt
drinking a
more
wine.
hanging out with Edufuturists, cool dude. He's got to chill out a bit and just join the vibe.
Let's get that on the wine list, Ben, for the 26th of June. Everybody, don't forget, tickets are probably still not available because we're flying at the minute, which is bonkers. But yeah, back to that. We have been banging on. I think it was, I can't remember how long ago I talked about the thing I presented at. I think it was University of the Essex campus. I can't remember which one it was but I'll have a look back. But I talked about human intelligence and artificial intelligence, and it wasn't. It was, I think it was 2020 or 2021. But it's not something I coined. But actually, we talk about all the time, like holistic education, all these kind of things. Why do we just and we'll ask? You'll know what the question will be because you listen every single week, Al. We ask the quick fire questions at the end, and we say these. Do we even know how we'd measure those things? And that's the difficult thing. The reason why, and often when we've had people on the podcast, is the tail wagging the dog because we're not going to change education and because the universities don't want it because they're still making enough money out of what they do. But also the way that we measure success is by exams, which is for grades of a particular thing. How do you do so if we're looking at human intelligence and all the holistic things? I think that's the really difficult thing. We know what it is. How do we judge and how do we measure it? Is one of the reasons why I think people have shied away from it, because they go, we know what it is. And also there's a whole wave of people that just think it's just completely irrelevant and not even needed. Probably never worked outside of education. But
here's a challenge. Because you're right, the idea of measuring the intangibles by the nature feels like, well, that's impossible because we're so pre-programmed to the idea of the structured way we do, particularly our high-stakes testing that then feeds into our education system. But I asked the question, if we start at the very simple bit, there's a seniority and a priority in the quality of our educational results. We have our GCSEs. In our career journey, they perhaps get trumped by our A-levels and BTECs, and that probably gets trumped if we go to university by our degree. And then we go on into our career. And we set a degree level, and we say we're going to ask you to study this topic for 3 years, and we're going to assess your competence and grip in that, which is a broad range of understanding based on a series of written tests and opportunities for you to write essays and talk to your lecturer and instill confidence in your understanding of the subject. And we're going to say that's a really, really important topic. And then you might go off and do your master's or your doctorate. And if you do your doctorate, you're going to go away and write about it for a year or probably longer. And then you're going to sit down in front of a panel and you're going to talk about what you know. And based on that outcome, you become Dr. Al. Who'd have thunk it? That's not going to happen. And yet we wind the clock back to something less important, like an A-level or a GCSE. And we say, hell no, we couldn't possibly judge you that way. You've got to remember everything up there. And we're going to test you in 2 2-hour windows. And it's as high stakes as that. And so there's an element that when we then go to the workplace and we're now paying you a salary to do that job, we don't say we're going to test you at the end of the year, Stephen, and give you a written paper on how well you're doing in your new role. We take it based on our observations and our judgments and iterative conversations throughout the journey. So the first change, I would argue, is not that we don't know how to test or assess. It's that we haven't yet figured out a way to do that within an education system without undermining the role of the educators. I would argue we had the pandemic that gave us this golden example where we had tags and CAGs, teacher assessed grades, centre assessed grades. And I was told by leadership, oh, well, our grades are up significantly, but, you know, in the national context, they would be because they've been judged by educators who are a bit softer, you know. And my view was, hang on a second, how about for the first time we've got some fair assessment of students, because the teachers who've assessed it actually know the context, have seen the child's work and so on. And if we think in the bigger picture of the alternative is our system at the moment, that's a bit like getting your 10-metre swimming badge. You take your GCSEs and we plan it so that 40% of the kids drown, because we only have it on a reference basis that once the kids are taking the exam, 60% can pass. The rest are going to be in the fail zone. So I would argue it's not that we don't know how to do it. In the same way as you good folks would know that I have a role with a pupil referral unit, alternative provision. I can sit down with young people and ask them about a subject and they can inform me about all sorts. If I hand them a pen and paper, I probably get 5 or 10 minutes before attention is dropped and their enjoyment and passion of sharing what they know diminishes. So what's wrong with us finding different ways for us to share and inform of our knowledge? Once we're in the world of work, how do we acquire new skills, new qualifications, new credentials that apply and allow us to get new jobs? We do micro-credentials. We go on a course, we study, we go online, we take these things, we get a badge at the end of 10 weeks or 12 weeks or 6 months, and we say that's sufficient proof that I understand and know this, and I can use that to reassure a future employer, or I can progress in my career. Why aren't we starting to see micro-credentials more prevalent within the education system? Maybe the future, and it's something, again, I've heard others talk about, maybe the future of education will be similar to acquiring just a choice of different resources you want, and you study them in a digital format, and you have a human being that wraps around that broader support and nurture to allow you to critically challenge and think about those bits and pieces. Now, that all sounds like big picture, and maybe that will have pushback from many. But the most important message is none of what I've said there in any way reduces the need to have teachers and educators and support staff to support and nurture a young person along their journey, broaden their educational experience, foster communities, relationships, resilience, and be there to level the playing field for children that have special educational needs. So it's not a threat, it's not an instead of, it's a changing the way that and the role of those educators.
That is exactly it. As you know, I was speaking at a conference a couple of weeks ago, and in that space, I said it's been a bit trendy for people to say AI is not replacing teachers, and I'm going to stand up here and say I think AI is replacing teaching, not teachers, and I know that the role of knowledge transfer that you've mentioned there and memorization in the world that we're in now has, or it may not, we might be taking a bit of time to catch up to this, but that's moved. It's developed. We were assessing for an age where information wasn't ubiquitous, and it is ubiquitous relatively. And so our role now as educators, I say ours because I'm still feel like I'm still in that space, and we're doing education in different ways, doing teaching people and educating in different ways. I'm supporting as a chair of governors in that space as well, that we as educators are still are changing, and the role is changing. And Vijay Govindarajan said a phrase that keeps coming up for me everywhere I go. It's organisations that don't continuously adapt or change will die. And we know that biologically, and we say organisations, but I think it's organisms as well. And that really harks back to me for something that Steve said. One of the first times I ever heard Steve speak, he talked about technology won't replace teachers, but teachers who use technology are likely to replace those that don't. And he's probably taken that from somebody else. He's heard somebody else, because this conversation has been on the horizon for a while, but it's then going to force, I suppose, a broader bravery, and we know lots of wonderfully brave leaders in this space. People, you know, I'm going to name drop Matt Jessup in that space, who's brave, who is trying to do something, who's just being brave, and I know that sometimes costs him, and I know that means that it can be isolating. But Matt, we're shouting out to you, we're saluting you what you do.
I've been championing him in a different platform than podcasting, because I think we need people who have got that skin in the game, that are happy to just say, this current system's just not good enough. It's not right on our kids. It's not fair on our kids. And sometimes you have to push a little bit past the line to get back to an equilibrium that's actually the next iteration and is sustainable. But that's good. There's too many people fearful, scared to break the mold, don't have the capacity right now. They're just in survival mode, trying to do their best to support the education system. I also think, and I'm seeing the shoots of it, and you guys are a brilliant catalyst for that because you bring together different voices. For a long time in education, I've really seen this both ways, this kind of real challenge and problem with imposter syndrome. The sense of really good folks in education who want to get involved with innovating and creating, feeling like somehow they're not worthy, or how the hell are they going to transfer their skills? And having to remind people that so many of the things they learn in education are transferable, that reflective practice, the way we do things, we think about things, are hugely important, and giving people the confidence. But I also see it the other way around, or I have seen it, where education, at times when we feel under pressure, AI is a brilliant example. There's this threat or an opportunity, depending on when you look. There's this rapid pace of change. It's really, really easy to be within the education space and just be dismissive. You wouldn't understand. You're not a teacher. You couldn't possibly understand. This is all irrelevant. It can't possibly happen. But it never comes from an informed place. And I think there's a real distinction between talking about system change and process and the tools and the opportunities and how we could restructure education, which frankly anyone from any perspective can share an insight and a view, whether they're technologists or frankly business leaders or politicians or whatever. And that subtle distinction between saying, and now we've identified what we need to do, telling people this is how you do it. And it's the this is how you do it bit that is the professional practice and that respect and credibility. But we actually need to be encouraging as many perspectives and viewpoints into the bigger system conversation to make sure that we get it right and to make sure there's that right balance. I use consistently a very clumsy analogy, and I think I've made a specialism of clumsy analogies of late, frankly, but it's that one about, well, if we developed an F1 race car for next season, would it be better if we said it can only be developed by the drivers or only developed by the engineers? The reality is both perspectives are really important. And I see that more than ever now in education. You know, AI has this opportunity to really challenge us to think creatively about the most human qualities, skills versus knowledge. But it also creates a little bit of a challenge between digital and tech versus human being. And I think some people fearful of the technology, the human being is, let's round the wagons up and perform a defensive camp and keep thinking of reasons why not. And that's not helped by some people claiming that technology is the panacea to everything. And clearly that's a whole load of baloney too.
God, I tried to back mute, but
yeah, no, absolutely, it is.
You may not agree with me, but you know what I mean.
No, I do. I think it's really important that you talk at that level, and that leadership is going to require. It's going to require, by definition, leading is more than managing, isn't it? It's moving into that space, and it is within a system. We know that we can't break a system. I'm conscious that I'm a very much a. You're not talking about. We've talked before about bears in a room, and that taking that from what's she called? Steve? Bears in a room lady.
Lindsay from IBM.
Yeah. And we've talked about, and we know that we're like bears in rooms, bulls in china shops, whatever else it looks like. Sometimes we want revolution, we need to change, but I think as we've got older, we've realised and probably been nurtured kindly by kind people who have said, you can't just break it, Ben, because it's too important, and we need to support the people in the space. Because I was conscious. That's part of the reason why we do the awards, as you know, is that it's very easy to point the finger of this is where we want to be and how excited we are about what could be, when actually there's some people who are on the ground who really are pushing that needle and really are addressing some of those elephants in the room and trying to create something that matters.
It's about balance, isn't it? We're very good at telling people what we could do and how we could do it, and we're not so good at explaining the why we're doing this, what the point is. And when we want change, we've got to make sure that, you either bring people along, dragging one by the heels, kicking and screaming, or you bring people along because they've been part of the conversation and they get an understanding of how this is going to impact them, and that whole kind of thing that often gets talked about in education. Teachers' glasses are full. Before you start throwing something else into the mix, even if you're saying it's going to save you time in the long run, you've got to think of ways of tipping something out of the glass first. You've got to find ways to find that balance that allows system change. And I try and talk a lot to these things about the positive, signposting the people that are doing amazing stuff, looking where people in other countries around the world have managed to already shift the needle and how we can learn lessons from that. That gives us confidence because there's a degree of evidence and efficacy. But I also challenge the other way around. I talk about the changing status of schools, moving from local authority to academy schools. And I've met numerous schools that have not been up for moving and academising based on the fact they're great in splendid isolation. And then suddenly when the head retires, everybody agrees it's absolutely the right time and they should be part of academy. And not that I in any way suggest that an academy, again, is the panacea to anything, but I have seen time and time again the decision about the long-term future of the school conveniently seems to change at the point when there's a change of leadership. So I challenge, I call out, and I appreciate that our leadership across our schools are doing an amazing task in a really, really challenging environment. But sometimes our decisions are taken to protect ourselves, preserve ourselves, whether it's in school leadership, coming together as a cluster. Well, there's 4 schools, so who's going to be the CEO? Who's going to be in charge? Does that mean we're going to lose our jobs? The same with academies. Are we making decisions about these bigger scale ones on a national basis based on what's best for the young people and the learners, their learning environment, their sense of identity? Or are we going purely for financial economies of scale? I'd argue there's a sweet spot, clusters of schools where everybody knows each other, they know their names, they understand the context, they can support each other. I don't necessarily agree with really large mats, but I also don't agree with schools in splendid isolation, missing the opportunity for professional development staff, cross-curricular activities for students, just because the leadership team feel vulnerable in their own roles. And this is a real challenge where if there was strong system leadership, it wouldn't happen. But what actually happens is in some places around the country, we have local authorities that have dwindled in their children's services and their education support because the number of schools has dwindled, and it almost becomes a fait accompli. And in others, we see a friction and a tension, the bad guys to good guys, depending on, again, are they bad guys, good guys? Well, newsflash, there's some amazing academies and some rubbish ones. There's some amazing LA schools and some rubbish ones. The badge don't make you great or not. But we still try and find this battle depending on where we are in the country. And we see the same in the States between whether we're a school district or a charter school and whether we have a certain state representing a certain view. And we can go to other countries around the world and see the same challenge. So one of the things I try and do is say, look, sometimes there are questions you don't want to talk about, but actually leadership in our schools, you can't blame the government for everything. You can't blame parents for everything. Some of this is on you, but you're no different to anybody else because you're human, and it happens in every country around the world. So congratulations. You need to reconsider and think these questions through, but don't worry because everybody else is too. And there's a sense of we're all in it together. We're either right together or we're wrong together, but prompting that, so what are the next steps? And empowering people at different levels to say, actually, what are the questions we should be asking them? How could we reframe it that empowers us to ask questions without offending other people, without implying it's about who's right or wrong, but just allow us to think about our context, our children, and what we're doing in our setting. And I think that, for me, interweaves through lots of these things. Some countries seem to be much better at it. We're still a bit UK-ish, aren't we? We're polite in queues. We like to do the right thing. We're respectful. Education, hallelujah. We're thoughtful, respectful, kind people on the whole. That's not the best recipe for how do we challenge each other and moving forward. It's lovely. And I value it hugely compared to the commercial world where people will say one thing to your face and something to your back. And if you tell them something, rather than pass it on and share it forward, they use it for their own competitive advantage and to hell with everybody else. But I also think the sweet spot in education, sometimes we need to be a bit tougher on ourselves.
Yeah, and I think if you think about the radical candor approach, and I think in education we take the view of conflict as a real negative thing, but actually the whole positive conflict, the whole you can still tell a strong message, you can still ask somebody to change, but ultimately, firstly, you do it with kindness, you do it with candor, but also, first and foremost, is we look at the bridge rather than the bridge builder. So when we talk about leadership, when we talk about changing education, I think ultimately anybody listening, you might be doing it as you're listening to us, and you might be going, "Oh, you're attacking me." No, we're looking at the bridge, not the bridge builder. We're not looking at you as an individual. We're looking at the whole system and looking across section. That actually, we do need to change leadership. We do need to change systems. We do need to change all those things, because if we don't, we continue to do the same things that we've always done. And in education, and I think it was in the show notes of one of the questions, and I don't think we'll maybe not get round to it, but if I say in England and I say, "Are you a good school?" our first thought is systemically that we go to actually, "Oh no, I was rated this." When did good become a bad word and actually not good enough?
That's
And
why it
also
became my chapter 1, Steve.
and that's the thing, and I know that's one of. But it's like that thing of, but if you took that, does that still sit? If you ask that question in any other country, is it just the system we've built in terms of those judgments that is leading it, or is it the fact our inability to reflect and not take it personally?
Well, I mean, I can be more challenging. I mean, the reason why the system's been quite helpful, and another one of my hats, I sit on the Regional Schools Directors Board for the East of England, supporting Matt. But, there's a lever there, isn't there? Double RI, and you don't have any choice. Your school becomes part and directed to join an Academy Trust. Handy lever for what are deemed underperforming schools. But we have a culture, don't we? When we say, well, you've got a good with your Ofsted judgment, there'll be a kind of a conversation saying, well, we were happy with that, but they didn't really pick up on the things that we really value. And outstandings are really hard to get these days, and they're not really a true measure. And then you get an outstanding, and it's like, we'll get the sign out on the wall next tomorrow. And we have this disconnect between when it's good, we agree with it, and when it's bad, we don't. But I think it's a much simpler litmus test. If I stop you in your street and say, tell me about your school, I visit hundreds of schools every year in different contexts, and I'm blessed that I get a chance to walk in the door, often for very different reasons. The thing that people introduce me about their school is about their vision, their values, their community, the things they hold dear, the behaviour of their children, the way that they interact, maybe some projects they're doing. If I go to Matt Jessup's a great example. It's beekeeping, and it's, I mustn't say llamas, it's the other ones, otherwise he'll tell me off for getting the wrong creatures in the field.
Alpacas.
Thank you very much. You've rescued me, Ben. He's alpacas. It's about the experience and the overall breadth of learning for our children. And yet when we flip it around to what's a measure of a good school, and we get into league tables, and we get into, basically, it's all down to progress and attainment, some capture of some measure, along with trying to fit kids in boxes that we now know 30-40% of the kids just don't fit in those boxes. Share of them out. How many of our children are going to fit into EBAC? The government target's at 75%. Well, we've got kids from very diverse communities coming to our school. 30% is appropriate for them. We have to have the kahunas, frankly, to say, well, we might get a letter about it. We might get told about it. It might not score well, but we're not going to set our kids up for failure and put them into subjects that we're not going to excel at. And sometimes you have to have those kahunas to say, not everything's about the league tables. Now, the system isn't set up very fairly. And if I was being paid to lead a school, I might feel the vulnerability of my job means that I need to pay more attention to those league tables. And I don't want to dismiss them out of rote, because we want those core standards. We need to have a measure to make sure children are getting a fair and quality education. But what we would all talk about, the things we'd think about as parents when we're taking our child, and is this going to be a good school for them, would be about that level of nurture, the environment, the stimulus, maybe concerns about bullying, inclusivity, the breadth of resources, the after-school clubs. It would be so much more than simply saying, they're 0.2 up on the SAT scores. That's the one I'm sending my child to.
And that's how it works. That is how it works, because we're looking at that. And I get it. It's a really, and it is a rock and a hard place. It's not that we want to throw the measures out, and you're no ways that's what's coming across. And we're not trying to say we need to make everything qualitative and all look touchy feely and all that. But it's not either or. I think it feels like I've said this. I feel like I say this quite a lot, and we've not actually had him on the podcast, but I quote him quite a lot, which is Mark Howells from RM actually used this phrase to me the other day, and he's probably taken it from somewhere. Again, like nothing's new under the sun. He said that we treasure what we measure rather than measuring what we treasure. I think I said that when we were together in that thing, and we do. We really love the numbers and the badges and the tables when it's good, but
This
then we
is
don't always measure
political,
everything,
though.
but we should.
Around the world, where do we start our measure? Where governments can say we're doing a good job. Forget all the devil in the detail of young people and their lives. We start with the PISA rankings. Look, the UK, England's ranked whatever in the tables for these different things, and Singapore and Finland sit high up on the tables. Well, the PISA rankings are a snapshot of 15-year-olds across what are largely sort of EBAC-based STEM-related questions on a particular topic. You go to America, they have the NAEP rankings and scores each year. There's a different system in a way that if schools and selected students score badly, there are interventions, but there's also money that comes with it. I mean, imagine here if we said, we've just had an inspection of your school and you're not done too well. We need to do some more support on attendance, whatever. Here's $100,000 to help you actually build the capacity and to achieve that, rather than just telling you need to improve. Bye-bye. We'll be back in at least a year. But the point is, if we start with the PISA being those academic measures and government ministers saying, look, we're up 2 ranks, that gives us a tick in the box from our political standing, then it starts, as is happening with what's changing and what we're doing and seeing with the OECD. I co-chaired a project for 2 years with the OECD, with Michael Stevenson, and one of the persons there is about looking at a high-performing school system that promotes human flourishing. And the human flourishing is a very, I wasn't involved in the defining the early parts, but built around very much around Aristotle type approaches to education, where we are thinking about the human child.
A bit of eudaimonia. I bet it's eudaimonia based on that.
A sense of awe and wonder about the arts and about innovation and the human skills. And if we start to measure, and by saying our measure is different, your skills, your innovation, your creativity are something we want to measure, by asking questions in a way that leads you to share expression and imagination, then maybe we start to say down the line, governments start to think, actually, we're up on the league tables when it comes to other measures, but hey, we're up on the table. We all like politically to be top 10 on something. Maybe we change the weighting. If we've always spent our time saying English and maths are most important, and then after that it's the sciences and the languages, and then it's kind of the rest, are we surprised that the rest doesn't elevate? When actually now we start thinking about those rest subjects, whether it's the digitals or it's the drama and the arts and music, all those topics actually stimulate and prosper the human bits, the bits where tech isn't quite so strong, other than digital, where our qualifications need to change, because we need to stop talking about the basics and talking about actually much broader, that digital citizenship piece about how to use tools safely and effectively and understand how to challenge the authenticity and the systems that we encounter, and that's one of those ones where no one's at fault. But if you look at the curriculum review right now, I'll stand. Maybe we'll get some comments when it gets shared where people will go, hell no, Al, you're definitely wrong. But I guarantee you the curriculum review starts with what we've got at the moment and what are the little bits we need to tweak. At some point, someone needs to be bold enough to say our curriculum review starts with a blank sheet of paper and what does our employers of the future want, and what skills are relevant, and what knowledge is relevant to fulfill that. And ultimate word that we'll all talk about will be agency. We want to empower young people to have agency. Well, that's a combination of skills and knowledge, facts. It doesn't diminish maths and literacy and other things, because that gives us context. And if you've got knowledge and skills and context, that gives you the basis of agency.
We'll stop, but I'm conscious of everybody's time. It's such. There's definitely got to be a book 6 and a book 7. But there also has to be a podcast 7 and a podcast 8 and everything else. But we always go into the end with 3 quick fire questions. And I think these are going to be really more relevant, if ever, than before in terms of the conversation we've been having, Al, in regards to, I'll start first, Ben will go, and then I'll finish up. The first one is, what outdated educational practice do we need to abandon?
High stakes testing.
Is it? Easy. High stakes testing. Okay. Second one is, how should we measure learning success beyond grades?
Practical problem-based solving and examples of understanding. That's a bit of a woolly answer, but in essence, show me what you know. Show me how you can use those skills that you've applied in a way that gives me confidence you've got a grasp of the concepts.
You're really going quick fire on this. I'm loving it, Al. What is one thing that you would want our listeners to remember?
no matter how much we talk about technology, no matter how much we talk about the changing landscape of the workplace and the uncertainty that brings, the number one valued item we will always have will be the human aspect of what we bring to the table. And no matter how much people talk about change, none of it happens unless people are at the heart of the conversation.
Absolutely love it. Absolutely love it. And I know that we want to massively encourage. That's the conversation that I was having in the book. I've read it. I know it's the conversation about we want to maintain what teachers do, not maintain, but support what teachers do, support what leaders do, support people, and it's about the humans with the skin in the game that ultimately is looking after these learners that really matter, and that's what we do it all for. The link for to get hold of Al's book is in the show notes. So if you haven't already bought a copy, first of all, why have you not bought one? But buy one for somebody else as well and share it with somebody else. Get hold of that, and how to follow Al and connect with Al if you're not doing already will also be in the show notes. Al, it has been an absolute pleasure as usual. Good luck with the rest of where the book's going and what else you're going to be doing. And obviously, you know that we're rooting for you with everything else as well.
You have always been huge supporters. I am going to just flip it around very, very quickly and just say all the things I try and talk about and highlight and model are things that are at the heart of what you guys do with Edufuturists, the community, human-centric, lots of conversation around tech, but it's all around empowering people to do the right thing at the right time with technology and the bigger picture. So I'm going to share a thank you back at you guys for doing what you do, and also to just being good, supportive people and human beings. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
We really appreciate it. And
we'll
see you on the 26th of June.
Yeah, hopefully. Yeah, we'll see you then. And if you haven't got your ticket, edufuturists.com/uprising. There might still be some left. 100 gone, which is incredible. So that's when we're recording. So see you very, very soon, everybody. And thanks for listening to the Edufuturists podcast.